I thought I'd seen just about everything a man could see in his lifetime. War on the news, funerals of friends, my wife's last breath in a quiet hospital room. But nothing prepared me for the night my son-in-law collapsed in our kitchen. It started with something small, or at least that's what he wanted us to believe. Richard had been limping for days, maybe weeks. He said it was nothing, just a sore foot, a blister from his work boots. I told him to sit down. Susan told him to rest. He laughed it off like men his age tend to do. "I'm fine," he said. "I'll deal with it." I should have pushed harder. That night I was in my recliner half watching the news when I heard Susan yell my name. There's a sound a daughter makes when fear takes over. Sharp, panicked, childlike, no matter how old she is. I ran to the kitchen. Richard was on the floor. His face was gray, sweat soaking through his shirt, his body shaking like it didn't belong to him anymore. Susan was on her knees beside him, trying to keep him awake, her hands trembling. "Dad, call 911!" she shouted. I dropped the phone once before I managed to dial. At the hospital, everything moved fast, too fast. Words flew past me that sounded heavy and dangerous. Sepsis, uncontrolled diabetes, severe infection. The doctor was calm in that professional way doctors have when they're carrying bad news. "The infection is advanced," she said. "He has a severe diabetic foot ulcer. There's tissue death, possibly bone involvement." Susan gripped my arm so hard I could feel her nails through my sleeve. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. "We're doing everything we can," the doctor said carefully. That's when I asked the question no one wanted to hear. "Are we talking about amputation?" The doctor didn't hesitate. She nodded. Susan nearly collapsed. I caught her before she hit the floor. Later, while Richard was in surgery, Susan turned on me. Not in anger, but in pain. "Dad," she said quietly, "you knew he was sick, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. I knew he wasn't taking care of himself, I admitted, but I didn't know it was this bad. Neither of us had known how far he'd let it go. The doctor came back with more truths. Richard hadn't been taking his medication. His blood sugar was dangerously high. His body showed signs of malnutrition, anemia, exhaustion. Susan covered her face with her hands. "He said it was mild," she whispered. "He said he had it under control." I'd raised my daughter to trust the man she married, and here she was, realizing how much he'd hidden, not out of cruelty, but pride. When the surgeon finally came out hours later, we held our breath like it might stop the world if we exhaled. "He's stable," the surgeon said. "We managed to save the foot for now." Susan cried. Not the quiet kind, the kind that shakes you from the inside out. "But," the surgeon added, "the next 48 hours are critical. The infection reached his bloodstream. He's in ICU. Alive." That word carried more weight than anything else. When we were finally allowed to see him, Susan stopped at the door. She looked at all the machines, all the tubes, and she shook her head. "I should have made him go to the doctor," she said. I put my hand on her shoulder. "No," I told her. "You shouldn't have to save a grown man from himself." Inside, Richard looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. The man who'd always filled a room now looked swallowed by wires and beeping machines. When he stirred, his eyes barely opening, he whispered Susan's name. She leaned close, tears dropping onto the blanket. "You scared us," she said softly. "You don't get to do that again." He tried to speak, tried to apologize. She stopped him. "No more secrets," she said. "You don't get to carry everything alone anymore. You're not doing this to us again." I watched my daughter find a strength I hadn't seen before. Not loud, not angry, but unbreakable. And standing there, watching my child stand up to the man she loved, I realized something painful and true. This wasn't just about a foot, or diabetes, or even pride. It was about whether he wanted to stay alive, and whether he was finally willing to let family help him do it. The ICU has a way of humbling you. No matter how strong you think you are, no matter how many years you've lived, standing beside a hospital bed reminds you how small control really is. Susan sent me home that first night. "Dad," she said firmly, the same tone she used when she was a teenager and knew she was right. "You need rest. I'll stay. I need you steady, not stubborn." I wanted to argue. Old habits die hard. But I listened. That was the first lesson of those long months. Listening instead of insisting. By morning, I was back with coffee in my hand and fear in my chest. The nurses told us the infection hadn't spread further. His fever was down. Small victories, they said. In a place like that, small victories are everything. When Richard finally woke enough to understand where he was, the first thing he asked wasn't about pain. It was about his foot. Susan answered him straight. "You still have it," she said. "But don't mistake that for luck. You almost didn't." He nodded slowly, shame settling into his face deeper than any wound. Later that day, when the room was quiet and the machines hummed like distant insects, Susan did something that surprised me. She didn't scold him. She didn't cry. She told him the truth. "You don't get to disappear on us like this," she said. "Not with a daughter watching. Not with another baby on the way. I don't need a hero. I need a husband who tells me when he's drowning." I stood back and let her speak. That was another lesson, knowing when not to step in. Recovery was not a straight line. Some days he improved. Some days he slid backward. The infection fought hard, like it didn't want to let go. There were more IVs, more scans, more waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Weeks passed. When Richard finally came home, he wasn't the same man who'd left. He walked slower, thought longer before speaking. And for the first time since I'd known him, he asked for help without being forced. Susan ran the house like a quiet general, medication schedules taped to the fridge, follow-up appointments written in thick marker, finances laid bare on the kitchen table. And when I tried to shoulder too much, she stopped me. "Dad," she said one night while I was folding laundry that wasn't mine, "you raised me to stand on my own. Let me do it." I smiled at that. Turns out, parents have to learn how to let go more than once. The months that followed were hard. Physical therapy, bills stacked higher than pride ever had. Nights when pain kept Richard awake and guilt kept him quiet. But there were changes too, good ones. He talked now, about fear, about shame, about how close he came to leaving his family behind without meaning to. When the baby arrived, loud, healthy, full of life, I saw something settle inside him. A second chance doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it limps in, scarred and expensive and humbling. Community stepped in when pride finally stepped aside. Neighbors, church members, old co-workers, people who didn't ask questions, just showed up. I watched my son-in-law stand in front of a room full of people one evening, voice shaking as he thanked them. "I thought asking for help made me weak," he said. "Turns out almost losing everything proved how wrong I was." 8 months later, I sit on the porch and watch him push his children on a swing he built himself. He still limps. Probably always will. But he's here. Susan catches my eye sometimes and smiles. The kind of smile that says we survived something. And I think about how close we came to losing him over silence and stubbornness. If there's one thing I've learned at this age, it's this. Strength isn't carrying everything alone. Strength is knowing when to let the people who love you carry you.